All right, well, welcome everybody to DSLR Fast Start. I'm John, and today we're going to be talking about the fairly new, very cool Nikon D5100. And so we're going to be going through the camera. This is kind of your in-live, in-person instruction manual. We're going to go through all the buttons and all the menus of the camera. So let's go ahead and get started. The D5100 is a very, very nice camera in my opinion. I've gone through it, gone through the whole instruction manual, and if you own this camera, you should be quite proud because it's quite nice. So here's kind of what we're looking at for the day. We're going to go through a little product overview to let you know what you've gotten yourself into. There's a lot of people who have purchased this camera. It's their first Nikon camera. It's their first SLR, and this is kind of a whole new world to them. For many other people, they've been involved in this for quite some time. But for a lot of people, I want to kind of introduce where you are. We're going to go through some photography basics to make sure everyone is kind of up to speed on some of the most basic elements of photography. And then we're going to go through kind of the whole camera on the outside, all the buttons, dials, and so forth, and talk about what they do and when you would use them. We're going to go into the display system to talk about how it feeds you information and how to interact with it. And then we're going to go through the menu system and look at all the different ways you can set the camera up for your own particular style of photography. And then finally, at the very end, we're going to put everything that we learned to practice, and we're going to practice setting the camera up for different types of photography. And that'll be a real good tutorial for beginning photographers on what needs to be changed for different sorts of things. So, when you get this camera and you open up the box, you get this really large instruction manual. It's got about 240 pages in it, and I figure if you spend a couple minutes per page, you're going to spend about 8 hours going through that entire instruction manual. Now, the class that you are about to see right now is going to last roughly 4 hours in time. And how is it possible for me to take 4 hours of information, or 8 hours, and cram it into 4 hours? And the fact of the matter is I can't. There's just a lot more information in the instruction manual that we're not going to go over today. This camera, as I have discovered fairly recently, has been designed for people, at least for some people, who don't have computers and don't have any access to post-processing programs like Photoshop or Lightroom. And so I'm going to bypass certain features of this camera, and from time to time I will tell you to reference the instruction manual for more information. I'm trying to look at the way most people use the camera under most usual situations. So you will need the instruction manual in addition to this class for some things. And then secondly, this is not a Photography 101 class. It's kind of assumed that you know a little bit about photography, but if you've never taken a photography class, that would probably be a lot of help after you take this class. Because once you know how to work this camera, that doesn't mean that you know how to take great pictures. There's a whole lot of other stuff that goes along with that, and I'll actually recommend a pretty good class for anyone who does want to learn more about photography. So let's get into the product overview and talk about the whole Nikon system that you've got yourself into if you bought a D5100 recently. So this is obviously a Nikon camera, and Nikon is a Japanese company that specializes in optical products. They make cameras, binoculars, all sorts of camera devices, you might say. They make a lot of sport optics, binoculars, telescopes, and they make a number of medical and other technical instruments with their optics. Now, they started back in 1917. They were a conglomeration of 3 of the leading optical manufacturers in Japan. And then in 1948, they brought out their first camera, the Nikon 1 rangefinder. And if you have one of these, it is worth a pretty penny these days, especially if it's in good shape. They are quite rare. And then in 1959, they brought out their first professional SLR. It was the Nikon F, and it featured a new lens mount. This was a single lens reflex, and we'll talk about what a single lens reflex is in a moment. But the lens mount on it is essentially exactly the same as on this camera here in front of me. So you could interchange lenses to some degree. It's been a bit of an evolutionary change, so there's a lot of things that are incompatible, but the basic size and structure of that lens mount has changed, and that's been one of the reasons Nikon users have loved their cameras, is that they've maintained the same lens mount. So when you invest in a large collection of lenses, it holds forward as you get newer and newer cameras. In 1986, things started to change a little bit because they introduced their first autofocus camera, and they spent the 90s kind of refining the autofocus system. And then in 1999, they introduced their first digital SLR, kind of the mainstream professional camera. And I remember when this camera came out because it was a big deal. It was just a fantastic deal in photography. It was around $5,500 and had 2.7 megapixels. And that was revolutionary at the time. And now we're getting cameras that are 16 megapixels for well under $1,000. So we've come a long ways in less than 10 years. One of the great things about being a Nikon owner is that Nikon has a full range of cameras to choose from. We have entry-level cameras all the way up to top-of-the-line professional cameras. So as you grow as a photographer and your needs change, there's going to be a camera for you to step up to step up the game. Nikon is also known for their great collection of lenses. They have a lens for pretty much anything that you might want to do. So there's probably a lens out there that's next on everyone's list if you own a Nikon camera. And then, of course, they have a great flash system. They've been known as having a very comprehensive and sophisticated flash system. So if you want to add a little bit of light, control light yourself, Nikon's got a great system for that. Now, where the 5100 fits in the big scheme of things, you might say, is it's what we're calling these days an upper entry-level camera. We used to just have entry-level and intermediate-level cameras, but they've kind of broken the lines up even further. So the true entry-level is the D3100, which is very similar to this camera. It's just kind of got a little stripped-down features, and they've kind of packed a lot of extra features on to this 5100. And this is based off of the D5000 that came out a couple of years ago, and that was based off the D60 and so on and so forth. So each, probably every 2 years or so, they update their cameras and refresh them with new features. Now, there's one feature about this camera that I haven't heard anybody talk about, and it's a revolutionary change in cameras for Nikon, and I just want to point this out here, is that if you look at the full Nikon lineup of cameras, they all have this very particular red nubbin where you put your finger, and the red nubbin on this camera is shaped a little differently. And I think this is just truly significant, and I haven't heard anyone else mention it, but I think Nikon's got a big change underfoot with this, and I just wanted to point it out to everyone out there. It's my little joke for everyone. Okay, so the D5100, and we probably have a lot of people tuning in who might own D3100s as well, because it's a very similar camera. And so I just wanted to compare how this camera compares with that one, as well as the previous models, say the D5000 or the D3000. And the previous cameras had 10 to 12 megapixels. The D3100 has 14 megapixels, and this one has 16 megapixels. We've increased the ISO settings on this, which is the sensitivity of the sensor. We can now go up to 25,000 on this, which means we can shoot under much lower light. We have live view in this camera as well as the 3100, and the previous models did not have live view, so that's a new feature. And we now have video in these entry-level cameras. The 3100 shoots at 24 frames a second, and this one shoots at 30 frames a second. So it's a very good quality HD video that you can get with this. The frames per second in the 5100 is a little faster than the 3100 or previous cameras. And this one has a higher resolution screen on the back, and included with that, it's also an articulated LCD, so it's got a little flippy out screen that you can flip out and angle around, which makes shooting video a lot easier to work with because you don't have to have the camera held up quite to eye level. You can shoot with it at lower or higher levels. Now, when you get the camera, most people get the D5100 with the kit lens, which is an 18 to 55 lens, which is a pretty good starter lens. I think it's fine for anybody who's getting into photography, but you may grow out of it. Just be aware of that. Depends on how fast and furious you get into photography. You're going to get the basic things like a battery and a battery charger, and various other little things like eye caps and covers and so forth. You'll get the instruction manual, and then of course you'll get some software so that you can download, view images, and view the raw images and so forth. I will recommend some other software that I think might be more useful for other photographers. The battery itself will take about an hour and a half to charge, and you can expect to get around 600 or more shots. It'll depend a little bit on how you use the camera. If you review images a lot, if you have lenses with vibration reduction on it and you use that a lot, or you just do a lot of autofocusing and not really taking pictures, you'll get less shots. But your mileage will vary depending on how you use it. Now, as far as the care and handling of the camera, there's a lot of dire warnings in the instruction manual about what you can and cannot do with the camera. And, just as for instance, it says, don't get it too hot, don't get it too cold, don't drop it, don't get it wet, don't take it apart, don't leave it by a giant magnet, don't store it with lots of corrosive chemicals, don't fire the flash at someone driving a car, don't use around flammable gas, and one of my favorite is don't swallow the battery. In essence, this is just don't be stupid with the camera, and I think pretty much everyone understands that portion of it. What a lot of people do have questions on is the waterproofness of it. The camera's not waterproof, don't get it wet. Well, how wet do you mean? Well, if this was my camera and I paid good money for it and it was raining out and I really wanted to get a shot, I would go out and I would get a shot and then I would get out of the rain. I wouldn't leave it outside in the rain. You don't want to be out there for a prolonged period of time. It does not have weather sealing. There are upper-end Nikon cameras that do have weather sealing that you could stay out in a rain and shoot a whole soccer game with the camera in the rain, but this is not one of them. And so if you're going to shoot in the rain, I would try to keep it undercover as much as possible. You might want to keep a soft towel so that you can mop up any water that's on the camera as much as possible, or you can either buy or build your own rain cover so that water is not really falling on the cameras and getting in all the crevices. Next, use of non-Canon accessories could damage the camera and may void your warranty. It is true, Nikon would like to sell you their accessories, and their accessories are designed to work with this camera. Most notably, you can put on different lenses, and I have not known other lenses to cause any sort of problem with the camera, but there are certain things where the camera and the lens will communicate to solve a particular issue. Maybe there's some sort of lens distortion that the camera knows about in the lens and can fix. If it doesn't know the lens, it can't perform that feature. The other thing is in batteries. I found that the Nikon batteries are very good batteries. They're sometimes slightly pricey, and there are cheaper aftermarket ones, but they tend to be pretty low in quality. I haven't known them to damage the camera, but they've been generally just low in quality. So you're not likely to damage the camera, but you may not get the best performance out of it. So preparing the camera, so hopefully your camera is ready for today's class. One of the things you want to do is you want to make sure the battery is charged, because we are going to be using the camera. We're going to be going through the menu system, so you want to have a good charge on the battery. Make sure your lens is attached. We do have our lens attached right now. Your battery's installed. We have a memory card in there. We'll talk about specifics of memory card and so forth, but we got a memory card in there so we can shoot pictures. And let's take our lens cap off, which I'm going to do right now. And go ahead and turn your camera on, main dial right on the top. And this is probably the last time I'm going to tell you this, but turn that main dial on the top of your camera to the green auto camera mode. And this is just so that everything is set up in the camera automatically for you. And just go ahead and take a picture. I'm going to point my camera over at Kenna and take a picture, and I'm not even looking through the viewfinder. And okay, so I didn't get a great picture, but at least the camera's working. And so I just want to make sure that everyone's camera is up and working right now. If not, your battery's dead, good time right now to go run and throw the battery on the charger, because we're going to go through something else where you may not need the camera right away. Now, one of the things that happens in these classes is that we're going to be going through the menus a lot. And the camera, when you turn it on, it goes to sleep after a bit of time. And so the way you wake the camera up from taking its little nap, going to rest, is by pressing down on the shutter release halfway to activate the camera. And what we're going to do right now is we're going to go in and we're going to change some things in the menu so that the timers stay on longer. So basically just follow this setup here. You're going to press the menu button on the back of the camera, and you're going to need to navigate up and down to the custom menu, which is the pencil icon. And when that turns red, that means you can enter into the custom menu settings. Go down to the section C called Timers and AE Lock, and go to the right. And then go to C2 and enter that, either going to the right or by pressing Set. And you can go in and set it for long, or if you wanted to get real elaborate, you could go into Custom and customize everything, which I have actually already done on this camera. But you can just set it to long and press OK, which is the button right in the middle of that little mouse pad on the back of your camera. And so this will keep the menus on longer and make the rest of the class a little easier to deal with.